Welcome to this easy, quick reference guide to Te Tarai Vaka, the Cook Islands Government Activity Management System. This short PowerPoint will take around 30 minutes to work through and will give you the key points to work with the system. The presentation is designed to complement your viewing of the TTV website and relevant policies and templates. There are key policies that you will need to read before you get started on an activity or project, and we will refer to these later in the presentation. So sit back, relax, and let me take you through the basics. Originally introduced to the Cook Islands in late 2014, Te Tarai Vaka draws on the way in which we traditionally and meticulously approached the major task of fashioning a new vaka. Extensive consultations were held with our elders and leaders about terms and methods that have served us well for this process in the past. Whatever the size of the vaka and its eventual purpose, the way in which we approached the project or activity had certain basic ingredients and requirements. We had what we would today call a template. Te Tarai Vaka is designed to streamline the activity management approach. It is really the first time the Cook Islands has had its own system and process for developing an activity in development. To build a vaka in the past and present day also, we need a clear understanding of what it is we're trying to achieve. What is the final product? What people, skills and knowledge are needed, and what other types of resources are required? The activity must be managed throughout the life cycle of the project to ensure we end up with the desired result, a seaworthy vaka or ceremonial vaka. To that end, a set of user-friendly templates, detailed guidelines, policies and processes has been finalised and endorsed by Cabinet and made accessible online across all of government through the MFEM website. All these tools are focused on learning and generating knowledge and using that knowledge to promote making better decisions. The whole idea of Te Tarai Vaka is to improve our own national systems and to end up with better decision-making in the face of complex development problems. The templates, processes and guidelines are designed such that even if you are new to development or new to working in a development activity, the process will be simple. An activity can be defined as a discrete grouping of actions taken or work performed through which inputs are mobilized to produce specific outputs and outcomes. Some of you may be familiar with the terms project or program, but we call it an activity. Our development partners have certain requirements they want us to meet when we access their development assistance or funding. But whether the funding is coming from development partners or from government, Te Tarai Vaka will apply to activities over $150,000. Occasionally, you may need to use the development partner project systems, but in every instance, discussions should be held with the partner to assess whether the Cook Islands Te Tarai Vaka could be appropriate. Te Tarai Vaka has 3 phases. The first is orama, or planning. The second is tarai, or implementation and monitoring. The third is akaramatatio, or completion and evaluation. TTV is a system by which we can ensure that activities are relevant to the real problems of target groups and beneficiaries. We clearly identify our stakeholders. Activities are feasible and sustainable and based on results, not just ticking boxes. We clearly define coordination, management, financing arrangements, monitoring and evaluation. We assess risk, which includes examining quality, economic and financial standards, and social and environmental assessments. While the system is mandatory for projects over $150,000, it can be used for projects under this threshold at the activity manager's discretion. Orama is planning. This comes from the concept of people talking together and working together to reach a common goal. The principle of do no harm is critical. Tarai refers to doing. Specifically, it references crafting the vaka with care and fashioning as you go. The process is adapted to the type or size of vaka depending on its purpose. This concept helps us to understand the purpose of Te Tarai Vaka to enable more effective development. Akaramatatio is monitoring and evaluation. It refers to learning and reflection. There is no point in learning after an activity. It actually needs to be at the beginning and throughout the process. Monitoring occurs throughout, with the basic principle of continuously checking your course with the stars and making adjustments where necessary. We acknowledge in TTV that local knowledge needs to be valued equally with knowledge from anywhere else. Okay, so now you have seen the overall process, let's dive into a little more detail on each stage. We start with orama, or planning, which has 3 main stages. The first is identifying the activity and completing a concept note for the activity. The second is designing the activity. And the last part is preparing the contractor grant. While there are a number of policies relating to this stage, your main policy document is D1 Activity Planning Policy, which we would recommend you read in detail. Firstly, you will need to draft your concept note. This stage can often take a while because different stakeholders identify different needs. Try and get some discussion started before you complete the concept note. This will ensure you have a better idea of the need or problem and perhaps how different stakeholders see the solutions to the problem. Consider stakeholders outside of government if appropriate. The template is designed to be short and to the point. Keep your information specific and don't go into too much detail at this early stage. You should be able to keep your concept note to between 5 to 10 pages. Take a look at examples on the MFEM-TTV website. Once your concept note is drafted, you are required to get a team together to appraise the document. This is essentially a team designed to critique the concept note and ensure it has considered the financial, technical and risk elements necessary to get it to the next stage. There is a special section on appraisals later in this presentation to give you more detail on this process. Once you have considered feedback from the appraisal team and ensured the concept note is robust, you can finalise it and send it to the relevant approval authorities. In the first instance, this is usually the head of ministry. In most instances, concept notes will then be required to get National Sustainable Development Commission, commonly referred to as NSDC, approval before going any further. Once you have approval for the concept note, you are ready to proceed to the next step, designing the activity. Depending on the purpose, size and scale of the activity will depend on the length and detail of the design document. Your main reference document here is C1, Preparing an Activity Design Guideline. It is important to note that the level of detail for this document is much more significant than the concept note, as this will be the source document for project implementation planning, procurement planning, risk assessment, and implementation arrangements. You may need to call on experts for some sections of this document. This may include financial requirements, environmental and social impact assessments, procurement planning, and specialist design features. You will be required to complete a results framework which gives short-term outputs and medium and long-term outcomes and ways to measure these. Similar to the concept stage, the design document will need to be appraised by a team of experts to enable a better finished product, which then goes to the relevant parties for sign-off. It is important you work alongside development coordination for this step in the process. It should occur early in the process and can sometimes occur before the concept note is established, when a donor or government might source funding for an activity that is not yet firmly defined. If this is the case, where possible, you should aim to finalise the concept note prior to signing an agreement for funding. Agreements will include amounts being funded and how the money will be received, terms of reference, any procurement and rules around this, for example under Cook Islands government policies or development partner policies, and defined outcome and measures. As you can see from this list, a lot of this is defined in your concept note and design documents, so it is helpful to the process to have these finalised first. Before moving on to the next stage in the process, Tarai, it is important to outline 3 key areas you will need to consider throughout the activity cycle, but in particular at design stage: quality, participative consultation, and safeguards assessment. The first is quality. There are 5 quality principles you should assess your activity against at all stages. These are based on the criteria for evaluating development effectiveness introduced by the Development Assistance Committee, commonly referred to as DAC, and will be referred to a number of times in this presentation. Relevance. The extent to which the activity aligns and remains consistent with the Cook Islands development priorities, policies and plans. Effectiveness. The extent to which the activity's intended results can be and are achieved. Efficiency. How efficiently are resources like funding, expertise and time converted to results? Impact. Impact is the long-term effect or effects which resulting from the activity, including positive and negative, intended and unintended, direct and indirect. Impact relates to the goal of the activity in the results framework. Sustainability is the likelihood of continued long-term benefits after major assistance like government or donor funding has been completed. The A1 Activity Quality Policy gives you a lot more detail on this important concept. Consultation is a word commonly used to seek stakeholder feedback on activities. Participative consultation asks you as an activity manager to think about who your stakeholders are and how you might best engage with them in a participative way. Here is a quick checklist for you. Identify social risks and impacts ongoing during the project cycle. Consult after the disclosure of relevant and easily accessible information. Pay attention to socio-cultural backgrounds of affected communities. Avoid manipulation, interference, coercion, or intimidation. Enable meaningful participation of the community using local language. Focus inclusive engagement on project-affected communities. Document the process and decisions and follow-ups. And incorporate feedback for future consultations. Disclosure of project information should occur prior to consultations and participation. Stakeholders need to be informed of project activities and expected outcomes and benefits before they are consulted. The nature, scope and frequency of stakeholder engagement will vary depending on the nature and scale of the project and its potential impacts on affected communities. An example of a participation plan is given in A7 Environmental and Social Safeguards Guidelines for your easy reference. There is an Environmental and Social Safeguards Policy and Guidelines which gives you detailed information on this critical area of compliance. It notes that people and societies are dependent upon and shaped by the natural world. Unchecked environmental degradation and pollution, overexploitation of resources, and low levels of resilience to environmental hazards leads to weak societies and instability, and can, in the long term, undermine growth. To be sustainable, economic growth is dependent upon a healthy environment, conserved and sustainably managed natural resources, and communities resilient to environmental impacts from climate change, climate variability, and other natural hazards, and to social impacts. You will need to ensure you complete an Environmental Significance Declaration and Permit form in conjunction with the National Environment Service as part of the concept note stage. The only concept notes that are exempt from this are capability building and system implementations requiring no major civil works. Filling out the declaration will tell you what provisional rating your activity gets. An A rating tells us that the activity has the potential to cause significant adverse impacts which are considered irreversible or unprecedented and which extend beyond the physical footprint of an activity. A comprehensive impact assessment covering the full range of environment and/or social impacts and impact management plan will be needed when an activity is Category A. A B rating is where the activity has the potential to cause adverse site-specific impacts, which are potentially reversible or more easily mitigated than for Category A. As part of the design phase, an impact assessment is to be conducted covering adverse impacts only, along with an impact management plan demonstrating how these will be addressed. A C rating, minimal or no adverse impacts. No further assessments are required. Most Cook Islands projects will be a Category A or B and will therefore require ongoing management throughout the project. Capability building and system implementations are likely to be the only activities that result in a Category C rating. Ensure you read A6 and A7 Safeguards Policy and Guidelines for further information on this important categorisation. Activities will not be considered by appraisal teams or NSDC without a category rating. Tarai, the implementation phase, commences once financial authority for implementation has been obtained and a contract or grant is signed. The reference document for Tarai is F1 Activity Implementation Policy. The key processes that occur during the implementation phase are inception and implementation planning, activity reporting, activity monitoring, payments and contract variations. The implementing agency is the organisation responsible for the contract and the funding. Inception reports are optional and are used when there is a requirement to update the activity design or scope of services or to provide a new basis to judge implementing agency performance. Reporting on progress should include the following: be supported by evidence, use clear and simple language, identify issues and possible solutions, make reference to what was expected, planned, and what was resulted, actual. Be signed as true and correct by someone within the implementing agency's organisation with the authority to certify this. Monitoring is the systematic collection and analysis of the information about a development activity while it is being implemented. Monitoring provides information about how allocated funds are being used, what outputs are being delivered, and whether progress towards intended outcomes are being achieved. Monitoring information is used in a variety of ways to inform decisions around learning, accountability, and improvement. Monitoring and reporting responsibilities of the implementing agency should be clearly set out in the activity design document and related contract or funding agreement. The implementing agency should take a lead in activity monitoring wherever possible to ensure Cook Islands' ownership and to strengthen the monitoring and evaluation capabilities of other local agencies and partners. The activity results framework is an integral part of the design of an activity and should form the basis for monitoring undertaken by the implementing agency. Along with meeting their own monitoring needs to support their management responsibilities, implementing agencies are responsible for monitoring and reporting on overall progress to any other agencies. Monitoring and evaluation have different but complementary roles and both contribute to overall performance information. Monitoring provides ongoing information about what resources are used and what progress is being made towards the intended results and outcomes. Evaluation can determine progress towards results and use of resources, but also determines the why and how. All activities require a completion process in order to determine results and performance information and support better decision-making, learning and accountability. The completion process formally ends a development activity. Activity evaluations are undertaken when there is a need for evaluative information to inform management decisions. Activity evaluations also contribute to learning, improvement, and accountability. During activity design, a decision is made as to whether an evaluation will be undertaken. The evaluation may be undertaken during implementation or after completion of an activity. The reference documents for Ākara Matatio are H1 Activity Evaluation Policy and I1 Completion Policy and Guidelines. Checklists are there to help you with the completion report and evaluation reports. Completion is managed by the activity manager in the agency responsible for implementing the activity. Management of completion can be transferred to another person at the discretion of the relevant HOM. The activity manager is responsible for sharing results, lessons learnt, and the activity completion report appropriately. The Development Coordination Division will complete an activity completion assessment on all activities over $150,000. All activity completion assessments must be approved by an HOM or Chair of Activity Governance Committee and recorded in the implementing agency records. The completion report aims to assess the DAC criteria. 1. Relevance. To what extent the activity has addressed the needs and priorities of the target groups and is aligned with relevant Cook Islands and partner, if relevant, policies and priorities. 2. Effectiveness. To what extent the activity has achieved the intended outcomes. This should reference a report of actual performance against the results framework. 3. Efficiency. Efficiency means the extent to which the activity could have been implemented at less cost without reducing the quality or quantity of the benefits. More broadly, assessment of efficiency should include consideration of whether the intervention provided value for money. 4. Impact. Include assessment of the likely impact, positive and negative, planned and unplanned, of the activity. Include available evidence on changes in the economic, social and political situation and status of beneficiaries. 5. Sustainability. Assessment of the likely sustainability of any benefits of the activity based on an analysis of relevant institutional, environmental and other contextual factors. An activity evaluation is a systematic and objective assessment of an ongoing or completed development activity. Activity evaluations vary in their purpose, focus, scope, and objectives. Evaluations may address one or more of the following. 1. Learning. To learn from the successes and mistakes of development initiatives funded by the Cook Islands Government. This includes learning about what has worked, for whom, and in which circumstances, as well as what did not work and why. It also includes organisational learning about the management of the activity. 2. Decision-making and improvement. The learning and knowledge gained from evaluations helps in making informed decisions which improve the ongoing quality of the work of the Cook Islands TTV. Information from all evaluations should feed back into government policies, strategies and activities to ensure better decisions, ongoing improvement of activity delivery and more effective development impact. 3. Accountability. To ensure accountability to Parliament and the Cook Islands tax-paying public and communities that Cook Islands funded activities are delivering. If an evaluation is commissioned by a partner organisation, then this activity evaluation policy does not apply. However, if the evaluation is funded by the Cook Islands Government, then expected quality standards for the evaluation should be clearly stated in contractual arrangements. There is a decision matrix in the evaluation policy which will assist you in reviewing if an evaluation is mandatory or optional for a specific activity. The two key considerations are the total value of the activity and its perceived level of risk. The related documents are H1 Evaluation Policy, H2 Evaluation Guidelines, and H4 Evaluation Decision Checklist. It was discussed earlier in the presentation that we would talk about appraisals further. Before we close out this presentation, let's go into the concept of appraisals further. Your reference document is E1. Appraising an activity concept or design guideline. The appraisal may be carried out internally by the relevant government department or it may be outsourced to an external party. If you outsource, you will need to create terms of reference. The terms of reference will specify the skills required and, if required, the composition of the design team and expected duration of the assignment. This may include a team leader, specialists and consultants dependent on the activity. It is important to ensure roles, responsibilities, reporting lines and outputs to be delivered are clarified. An activity manager may contract part or all of the design team if required, or provide funding for technical assistance to undertake a design. Specialist skills may also be contracted to support the procurement and negotiation of contracts if required. Ensure financial approval has been obtained prior to contracting. A written and oral briefing will ensure the design team has the necessary information on the Cook Islands mandate, strategic focus areas, operating context and policies, including cross-cutting issues of gender, environment and human rights. Appraisals will assess the relevance, effectiveness, efficiency, impact and sustainability of an activity which have been previously discussed in this presentation. As part of this assessment, it will review the results diagram and work plan as critical components of the design. The activity will be assigned an overall risk profile of low, medium or high by identifying the highest individual risk to the activity and using the risk matrix. The Cook Islands Government is committed to addressing gender equality and women's empowerment, climate change and disaster resilience, and human rights as cross-cutting issues. The documents A2, Cross-Cutting Issues Policy and Guideline, give you more information on how to best assess these issues across your activity. The guideline provides screening questions you can ask and provides strategies to take into consideration. Here are some brief examples to give you an idea of the types of questions to ask in preparing your concept notes. Gender equality and women's empowerment. You could ask, have women been consulted properly in the analysis or intervention? What obstacles are there to women's participation and are they addressed? For example, time, transport, or financial resources. You could also ask, does the activity recognise the strengths, skills and activities of women and men? Climate change and disaster resilience. You could ask, does the activity objective or analysis specifically consider climate change and disaster risks? For example, is the activity taking place in an area subject to extreme events such as floods, tropical cyclones, storm surges, or tsunami? Or are there demographic or socio-economic aspects of the area which are already vulnerable, like tourism sites or a high incidence of vulnerable groups? Human rights. You could ask, are some groups likely to be affected differently by the activity? For example, children or people with disabilities. If so, what are these effects? Or do any practices associated with the activity exclude or discriminate against a particular group of people? For example, in education, are fees, uniforms, stationery and travel to school affordable for everyone? Make sure you document your observations and get an expert in if needed. The checklists are very comprehensive for all stages of the Tarai Vaka, so check them out. And finally, let's talk briefly about the grievance redress mechanisms for your activity. You need to start with the assertion that stakeholders have a right to information about the activity, environmental and social impact assessments, resettlement plans, cabinet papers and reporting. Where possible, this information should be shared regularly on the activity or agency website. Strategies should be discussed to collect stakeholders' views on project improvements in an ongoing manner. It is noted that in the Cook Islands, often the first and best recourse available to persons with complaints may be the informal or traditional means by which community conflicts are managed. You may be interested to know that most complaints relate to lack of consultation with affected people and civil society organisations, failure to disclose activity information and plans, poor planning and implementation safeguard documents, inadequate financial and institutional resources, clashes between local laws and international best practices. It is therefore useful to consider documenting a clear statement on how affected persons can submit their complaints, a log where complaints are registered in writing maintained as a database, publicly advertised service standards outlining the length of time users can expect to wait for acknowledgement, response and resolution of their complaints, transparency about the grievance procedure, governing structure and decision makers, an appeals process, including judiciary, to which unsatisfied complainants may be referred when an agreed resolution by other means has not been reached. Of course, you can refer to current mechanisms of complaint within government, but if your activity is large and in the public arena, you should consider having a tailored grievance mechanism. Thank you for working through this presentation. In summary, we have covered the 3 stages of TTV. Orama, planning. Tarai, implementation and monitoring. Akaramatatio, completion and evaluation. Please ensure you work alongside development coordination to understand and build your skill set in activity management. For more information and to find all policies, guidelines and templates, go to www.mfem.gov.ck/AMS. There is a further 5-minute video with the background and context for TTV and additionally an Adaptation Fund training presentation on environmental social safeguards. Mita ki maata.